So we are here with Eric and his guest, who cannot refer to himself.
Yep.
Eric, tell us a little bit about this podcast. Um, what's your goal?
Well, so I am the recurring character of this podcast, and I continue to get interviewed. And as you have before we started recording, you asked, who's going to do the intro, and I was like, that's a great question. You can do it if you want, and you have, and that will be an interesting question to add to the next podcasts. Who wants to do the intro?
Yeah, it's
The
very
goal is
interesting.
basically for me to be known more because I'm not as much of a writer, I'm more of a talker. Is one frame.
Interesting. So you are able to express yourself more easily through speaking as opposed to writing. That makes sense. Would you consider yourself an extrovert?
A strange kind of extrovert. I used to be very introverted, and then I just came to like talking to people. Um, like specifically, I express myself better in conversation versus just talking. So that is another reason why a podcast in particular, as opposed to, I mean, I could do a podcast just by myself, but that doesn't work either.
Right. No, I mean that is really one of the best uses of a podcast, apart from reaching an audience. Really, is just to have long form conversations that in the even in the real world rarely happen to the point. Like 2-3 hour conversations, very rare. At least for most
Mm-hmm.
people. Also, before we get much further, I should kind of give the audience a little bit of background on. Oh, there was a personal pronoun just slipped through.
Mm-hmm. Oh
So
dear.
Eric, well, there's another one. One of your jobs during this podcast is whenever you hear self-referential language, you need to call it out,
Okay.
so that your guest can be held accountable. But one thing that happened about last Sunday was there was this interest in, or a book was being read by a man called Douglas uh, or David Hawkins or something, where a lot of the stories in the book were not told in first person, and it was all about like
Hmm.
kind of letting go and kind of like achieving some
Oh.
sort of like non-dualistic kind of enlightenment state or whatever. But it took about halfway through the book to realize that he was talking about himself, and
Hmm.
I was like, oh my god, there's another one. Um, but that was part of his journey, was realizing that the ego and what is all basically a hallucination, and it's not your deepest self is not tied with the normal personality that you project, or
Hmm.
the
The
person, the
identity.
name, the face, exactly. So as kind of a fun experiment, it was decided to spend an entire week not referring to the self, either in person or online. And so this is like day 5 of that experiment, and it's been extremely hard. And one great revelation has come, that most language is super automatic and does not really go through what we would call conscious thought. So that has
Hmm.
been very interesting. Um, so what are your thoughts on that, and why? What? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Well, so it has an interesting interaction with this podcast in that the initial framing of this podcast is Eric tries to inhabit his first person perspective. Um, Normally, I'm quite good at a second person perspective, which is something like, what is this other person's experience um, in based on, what experiences I've had? Like, how do I think this person's experience? What would I think that's like? And so this seems like it's actually quite a good fit of some kind to this whole thing. See, here I am, imagining what is it like to try and talk without having any self-referential language. And I was curious where that all came from. I didn't actually look up what that was. Um, hmm
So yeah, it was entered into with a, just kind of having fun, but also curious to see if there would be kind of like experiences of like non-self and no self, um, which so far haven't happened. Um, so, but it's yeah, it's kind of a one of many different little experiments that have happened in the past,
Hmm.
basically pushing the comfort zone out, pushing, kind of doing things that are more uncomfortable. There is definitely a feeling of a feeling of similarity towards you in regards to having been introverted in the past, and through what different means and different jobs that have been had, um, to become more extroverted and more comfortable around people and more willing to basically go out and do stuff that is socially kind of
Hmm.
scary, like being on a podcast. Like this is very like this has not been done before by this
This is your
entity.
first podcast?
It's my the first podcast where the guest is the interviewer. So
Ah, gotcha. Has anyone around
and
you,
also and not being able to refer to the self. So that's
right?
double score.
Has anyone else around you picked up interesting interaction habits with you during this experiment?
Um.
Like,
So
have
in
they
per
also started not referring to themselves, or like referred to Nat in some strange way, like not referring to you in particular, or something?
not in like so basically there's uh, a wife called Martha and four children, and the family is living in an RV. So that is the in real life social circle. And around sometime yesterday, like going into it, like knowing that the real life situation would be a little tricky with the children and communication, it was held rather lightly if it was going to work. So I there has been basically letting go of that kind of language around like the family, but there was a challenge made by someone on Twitter to have an interaction with a complete stranger, which is something that was being avoided, as it sounded terrifying. So there was going into a truck stop yesterday and buying some gloves, and the cashier asked, like, "So, how are you doing?" And the response was, "There's a feeling of happiness happening." And he looked at me like something was a little off. Oh, you didn't catch it. He looked at like something was a little off, but he didn't say anything. He just said, "Right, okay." And then some more interactions happened, um, and by the end of it, like it was definitely a little strange, but he was very professional. Another person on Twitter, I've noticed that one of my mutuals, or one of a mutual on Twitter, he has been referring to this person as bracket bracket, which I thought was interesting. Like so basically completely taking out any reference to
Hmm.
to the person he's talking to. Um,
That was another thing
Basically
I was wondering.
playing
And
along.
to what
It's playing
extent are you
along
allowed to? Mhm. What,
to
what what
to
to what extent are you allowed to reference to uh, this the guest on the podcast?
yeah.
What level of reference is allowed?
Right. That is a question. It was never completely the rules that were come up with at the beginning weren't like super rigid or detailed, so that's a little bit of a gray area. Also, speaking in we was a little bit of a gray area,
Hmm.
but for the most part, it does seem kind of cheating, doesn't it? To I mean, if it was just reference, if there was referencing being made to the person or the man, or I mean, it's still definitely kind of like shakes you up a little bit, or the whole point of this experiment, right, is just to get out of that mindset of thinking, like you thinking of yourself as you or Eric, and the
Mm-hmm.
person, the anyone who does this experiment basically just kind of, however they can, start feeling like, to just realizing how arbitrary it is, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
guess that's the thing, is that it seems like as we grow up and we become more and more social and aware, we basically start creating this character based on partly us, but mostly on other people's reactions to us, I think,
Mm-hmm.
or other reactions to you. But it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that. So enough about your guest. Let's switch the frame to you. Um, where where did your sense, or where would you say your sense of personal identity comes from?
Hmm. Yeah, identity has been a strange one for me. I've, this often comes along with, what do you do for work or your job? I feel it's like, a default story that people have as part of their identity. Um, what sort of social groups are they part of? What are their hobbies? Um, what subcultures are they in almost? And definitely I have come to see my main identifier things as being like dance and movement more generally as like one big area of my life that I sort of identify with. And then what started as rationality, but is more just like intellectualism is kind of what I want to point
Mm.
at it with. That is how I've been conceiving of my identity. But then there's also aspects of, what are your social roles and all that. And I have been avoiding having any labels for a lot of my social roles, actually. Um,
Now, how
it's been
what do you mean? You've been avoiding having labels? Like what does that mean? You've been avoiding
well, so
fulfilling social roles, or you've been avoiding the
ah
label that goes with the role?
well, I've basically managed to not have a job ever, like a paid, like here, sign a contract, and you're going to get paid this much, blah blah blah. Like I haven't had a title at a job, is maybe the way to put it. I've definitely been paid before, and like it's usually one-off things. Taking photos for somebody, doing some video work, teaching some dance, fixing people's computers, uh, tutoring and mentoring or coaching of various kinds. But they're sort of just like they've always been like actions and not really like tied to who I am in the same way. Um, the closest thing really is teaching dance or uh, coaching. But the question is like, what do I put on LinkedIn? And it's like, I guess to answer something
Well,
like that is I've been trying to invent this role of a context artist of some kind.
interesting. Can you expand on that? What does context artist mean?
Well, the thing with context art is you can't really just talk about it. You know, part of this podcast I would call context art. Here we are
Okay.
in the podcast. What can you do with a podcast? What is the context of a podcast? Why am I the one being interviewed even though I'm the recurring guest? That's a little strange.
I see. Well, what's another example?
Hmm. I think my favorite bit of work that I've done has been sort of reverse lightning talk. Um, you know about a lightning talk? Does that mean anything to you?
Right, like a short, like 5 minute talk on some topic, and usually there's a bunch in a row.
Yeah, yeah. There's like 10 or 20 or something, and people sign up and they have a topic name on the
Yep.
list, and then you just like go through them, right? Right. So I signed up. Well, I didn't sign up. Under the name, I put context, and under the topic, I put Eric. And then what I
Mm.
did is I went up and I sat down and I said, so it looks like the context is going to talk about Eric.
Uh, and then you just sat there
And
silently.
then I just like sat there for a while, and then some people sniggered, and they're like, "Wait, what's going on? What did he say? What's happening now?" The only reason I could do that though is because there was a whole frame of there being a lightning talk in the first place. That's such that people had to like you know fill in the thing. And then
Right.
I didn't just sit there for 5 minutes. I had other things up my sleeve. I was
What'd you
at
do?
some point I raised my hand.
That's funny. That's really
Someone
funny.
called on me, and then I asked them what the context was.
Okay. What'd they say?
So I've pulled this kind of thing a few times at lightning talks. It has to be different every time, otherwise people they catch on to it. So by the fifth
Right.
time, I was like, the first thing I'm asking is like, okay, who has context for this talk? And then I asked them to go find the context. Like people would raise their hands, and then I asked everyone to go and find the context. And at the end, I was just like, I've given a weird context talk every single time. So those are my favorite
Now,
examples of
okay,
context
yeah,
artist work.
or there's a feeling of curiosity. What does that feel like as a former introvert to sit up there? There's a sense that it could be quite embarrassing or awkward.
Yeah. What was surprising about it is once I had the idea, I was like, oh, that is far easier to do than any kind of actual lightning talk. Like, all I have to do is lean into this like discomfort. I could do that. That's super straightforward. Like, in fact, I was like, probably the audience is going to be more uncomfortable than I am
Right, right.
because like they also don't know what's going on. As long as everyone like thinks what's happening is fine,
Yep.
then everyone's happy. No one's uncomfortable. Maybe the person giving a talk is uncomfortable, but yeah, it was a way of flipping that around.
Yeah,
It
and
was,
that does, yeah. Oh, that does expose a part of public speaking that is people talk about is that the speaker, I mean, feels awkward and uncomfortable, but usually, as I mean, from the audience's perspective, that you could say whatever you want, and like they're, as long as you say it confidently, they'll just be like, oh, okay, okay, whatever. Like you said, like they're sitting there like not wanting to be awkward themselves in a certain sense. So it's like they're
mm-hmm,
just grateful that someone is up there taking the attention, in a really weird way. I don't. That's just it's just like I said, as someone that was an introvert. So
mm-hmm.
okay, but I interrupted one of your thoughts. Can you please continue?
Sure. Yeah. The thing that spawned this idea was just leaning into discomfort or um, leaning into the unknown. So, like, I didn't know how people were going to respond to this. A lightning talk is normally kind of, here's my canned thing that I've figured out, and like, I'm just going to deliver it. Whereas this is much more improvisational. And I just had a few ideas of what I might do, but I didn't, it would depend on the response from the audience. And if people kept talking, I might not just raise my hand ever, for example.
So okay,
Um,
how long was the talk? Like what happened at the end? Did,
it
did they
was,
take a did they take one of those hooks and pull you off?
yeah, basically. Uh, well, I think the first time it was Chow Chu tackled me. He had a whole thing of like he's gonna when the timer's up, he's gonna like encroach on you and eventually just tackle you, and then it's over, and
Right,
then
right.
everyone
But
cheers.
but you're just
Yeah,
sitting there. You were just sitting there.
I was just sitting there. Yep,
Right. So he like
the
he
context tackled
forced.
me. But
Oh,
that
that
was
is
something
really
that I
that's
knew was
cool.
going to happen because that's how he had handled all the other ones. So I
Right.
was like, okay, that can be taken care of. I don't have to end it.
Right. No, that makes sense. Fascinating. Wow, cool. Okay, so learning a little bit about context artists and what that means. It does seem very appropriate that you couldn't explain it. You had to give some context first. So now we all have a better idea of that. That's good. Um, we also we're talking about identity and how identity is often comes to us through our job, which you've never had. So in a certain sense, you've been spared from having any kind of corporate identity that you have to live up to, or what? I mean, it's just like you don't even have that. Um, what about other types of identity? There's identifying as a human, identifying as a man, identifying as a son or brother. Like
Hmm.
how do you feel like just in terms of identity in general? It does seem like what about? Can you talk a little bit about the idea of identity coming from the outside? Because it's like if you were just alone on an island, what would your identity be?
Uh, yeah, what is yeah, I would say, I can answer simply in one way that it's like I feel like I'm a man that feels pretty straightforward
Okay.
in a certain way. Um, would I be a man on a desert island? Uh, I might not pay attention to that. It seems true. I'd probably identify
Right.
as human, or like some being who's trying to exist in the world. For
Yeah.
sure, human sort of. I can't really unite with other people around being human the same way.
Right.
Um,
But there would be a relationship between you and the other animals, between you and other like vegetables or
yeah,
different. I mean, so yeah, being identifying a human as like a human animal would make sense. Yeah, I could see that
yeah.
happening.
What are the other categories? I don't remember them all.
Well, just I mean like family identity. Like I mean, I guess that's another social type of identity, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just I mean these are all thoughts that have come up from this basically this challenge of not referring to the self.
Mm-hmm.
One big revelation has been how it's necessary for social interactions.
Yeah.
Like this conversation is extremely hard without any kind of refer. I mean, if I couldn't, and if there wasn't the ability to refer to you, it would be like nothing. Like it would just be like everything was shut down. So the fact that there can't be reference to one party of a conversation is already hard enough. But so that's the thing. Like, but as alone on an island or like the single player game idea, there really is no need for that kind of identity, right?
Mm, yeah, I think so. I mean, so I think I'm an example of someone who is, yeah, very, my identity is very socially constructed, and at least I'm very aware of that. Another lens on the whole podcast thing here is I tend to mirror whoever's the guest on the
Interesting.
podcast. Or
Uh,
like interesting conversation, I tend to mirror people to some extent. So like here, I notice I'm talking about my weird social experiment type things.
right, right.
That I haven't with other people so far. Um,
So I mean that is a good question. That the whole thing of like, the personality or identity, how much of it is actually outsourced to the people in our social group? Like it is
uh,
like there's an argument that can be made like that someone cannot truly be themselves apart from like their context or apart I mean their social context. Like what do you
I
think about
mean,
that idea?
welcome to context artistry, right? Like, it's quite the canvas to play with context. Um, I mean, I basically agree, and I also then start asking, like, what can you do with that then, or what does that imply?
Mm-hmm.
What sort of, what kind of technology is that, where all of our stuff is in some sense socially constructed is the word that people often use.
Right,
I had a
right.
slower thought about that. Hold on.
Yeah, I remember this from your talk with or there was when you were talking with Sylvia. You were talking about pauses in podcasts. I thought that was interesting. Dead
Right.
space.
Is the listener uncomfortable with a pause in their podcast? Do they feel like they need to be listening to the right thing at all times and are in such a rush? I mean,
But
this is me also asking myself this question of when I'm listening to podcasts. Is this the best use of my time? I find myself asking sometimes.
oh, okay. And that's kind of like the silence, like either in your art that you're the lightning talk or in the podcast here. It's very interesting that the uncomfort or discomfort that happens in the audience, and it is almost like in that silence, they have to do all the work of constructing their own identity and constructing their thoughts. And it's like one reason they're listening to other people, and this is from personal experience as well. One reason they listen to other people is basically it's like outsourcing their identity, outsourcing their thinking to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but did you remember your deeper thought or slower thought? Uh,
Many other thoughts have come since, and I have now
okay.
lost it. What I recall is it's something around uh, the artist's brush of context, and if our identities are largely socially constructed, something. Have you heard of the intelligent social web?
No, tell us about that.
So I think you have somewhat independently come up with a similar idea of who we are is largely determined by what other people our identity in some group is determined by the people in that group, and it can be based on whatever initial interaction that then starts resonating between the different members of the group, and then it becomes a sticking point or an equilibrium of some kind, and this is now that person's identity, and that has to be done in contrast to who everyone else is. And in organizational behavior, I think there's some field in business where they talk about forming, norming, something like this. It's not it's more of an observational sort of phenomenon that they talk about. It hasn't been
Right.
proven in studies, but it's not the thing that really needs to be proven in that way.
Right, but and that's the idea of like group dynamic, how group
So
dynamics change over time.
there's
Oh, go ahead.
how
Forming,
they
storming,
form
norming.
and how they get to a place of working together. Yeah.
Gotcha. It is almost like creating
So given that, what do we do?
what be very careful about who you hang out with.
I mean, that's another thing. They also say they. Who is they?
they
They say.
they say
They say that you are the combination of your 5 people you talk to the most or are closest to or
right.
whatever.
Yep, and that is something
I've
that
thought about this one a lot.
there's a similar there's a sense of agreement on the other side of the camera, um, especially with a wife and 4 children. I mean that is a very interesting, yeah, that's a very interesting thought that is thought very often, like what is happening here. Becoming more childlike perhaps. So
Mm-hmm.
who, okay, so let's jump into that. Who are the 5 people that you spend the most time with?
Hmm.
And are they all in real life
At this point,
or online?
yeah, it's become really weird with COVID. I don't see 5 people. It would have been my. I mean, Malcolm is probably number 1 these days. There's my mom. There's Malcolm's partner, Sarah. There's my. This is, I think, I'm. So there's my ex, who I am still in the in my memory is still considered part of the 5 people, even though I'm
Mm,
probably moving away from that.
right. Okay.
And then I don't know who the 5th one would be at this point.
Interesting. Now,
Twitter's the 5th one.
yeah, the Twitter is definitely a hive mind of some sort. Um, So, and that is really interesting. So, one thought as you were talking came to me is that so yes, there's this idea that the five people that you most interact with are you're basically a summation of that. But that also means that there are people out there that are 1/5 Eric,
Yeah.
or that basically, like, if you want to get really meta, like your identity and like being is actually spread out through other like a few other people around you, like in a very real way, like in a very real like it's not genetic, but in almost like maybe a mimetic way. It's like they're 1/5 you because of the influence you have, like just unconscious. I mean, isn't that crazy? That's
Hmm.
really weird. Or,
I
even
never
in this
really thought
yeah,
about it in those terms, but I
right,
do
right.
feel,
But if it works one way, it's working the other way, right?
uh-huh. I think I've generally had a lot more influence on other people than people have had an influence on me.
Oh, really? Okay, so maybe more than 1/5.
Maybe.
Now, why do you say that? Why do you think you have a lot of influence on people?
Uncertain people, it tends to be somewhat targeted. I have this whole learning environment thing that I like to set up in certain
Okay.
ways, or like the way I approach a lot of um, interactions in Vancouver in particular has been like, I know all these things, I have all this stuff, these conceptual frameworks, these skills, and these ways of being. I'm going to be them. I'm going to teach them. I'm going to provide a. I'm going to be a space for that learning to happen. And so basically, I just like offer that to people who I think are interested, and then I have conversations with them. I dance with them. I spend time with them. And it's kind of, at least in the last 5 years, it's been more me to them directed. I feel like I'm coming to the
Mm.
closing of an arc of a certain kind, and this new arc with Malcolm is being more. I'm being influenced by people. Oh God, people are going to
How's
tell
that?
me who I am.
Yeah. How's that make you feel?
Um, I mean, honestly, though, I feel like that's what's been missing is uh,
Hmm.
I kind of don't know who I am in some ways, or like I'm like negative space, so it is somewhat hard to pin an identity on me. There seems to be a lot of those, type of guys out there who, as soon as they become a type of guy, they change or try and be a different type of guy. I'm definitely in that category.
Hmm. What type of guy were you before this?
Well, I mean, insofar as, type of guy who is not a particular type of guy or changes when they get labeled as a type of guy, like that was probably the type of guy I was before. Now it's, I mean, if you can name it, I'm going to.
Okay. There's a little bit of confusion over here. But
Hmm.
but
It's a bit of a Twitter thing, maybe.
well, yeah. There's familiarity with the meme, like type of
Hmm.
guy. But no, yeah, interesting, interesting. So one thing, another thought that would be good to get your opinion on is that it seems like people that do teach or that basically are always like, you know, because you're right that I mean I would say most people want to be influenced more than influence. Like most people are seeking some sort of identity or meaning or purpose, and there's very few people who are comfortable being that basically that voice of authority. And maybe this isn't what you were doing exactly, but like thinking of different like spiritual teachers or different any kind of teacher really. um, th- yeah, like how does that work with giving, like being like having people look up to you or want something from you? Like, do you feel like it seems like if you're not getting it from them, like, this conversation is kind of a mutual back and forth. But if it's mainly just directed in one way, where are you being like, filled, or where are you getting your purpose from, if not from the people that you're helping? And you can either talk about
Hmm.
yourself or more generally just like a guru or a teacher. Like what kind of dynamics do you see at play there?
So, yeah, I think I'll talk about the being a good follower actually.
Oh, okay, great.
So there's this talk that Derek Sivers gives that's really short. It's like a lightning talk, and it's called "How to Build a Movement" or something like this.
Yep.
And in the thing, there's just one guy dancing. He looks a little crazy, and then a second guy joins him and sort of legitimizes the dancing. Now
Right.
you're not just some crazy guy. There's these two people dancing, and like very shortly after that happens, a third person starts joining, fourth person joins, and then like everybody joins all of a sudden. Um, there's a lot of, as you said, spiritual teachers, gurus, or leaders of different kinds. And I found my role best to be something like the first follower, which is to say,
Curious.
I'm not the visionary. I'm not the one who, figures out the truth. But I am the person who like verifies it and gives it legitimacy and can evaluate it, and then decides to like maybe translate it or embody it or whatnot to other people. So, I mean, various people that I have been influenced by, or various places. I've I've been at CFAR for a long time. I've definitely been influenced by the rationalists. Do you know about CFAR?
No, tell us about that.
The Center for Applied Rationality. Um, it's it's an outgrowth of the Machine Intelligence Research Institute. Um, Basically, some guy named Eliezer found that he couldn't talk to anyone about AI in his preferred way and preferred frame because no one knew how to think. So he wrote up everything he knew about how to think, and then started a bit of movement there.
So,
And then
so
people are like,
it
but how do we actually train how to think?
right, yeah. So, did he figure it out? Did he figure out how to train people to think?
Well, he had some things to say that I think were really cool, and it definitely changed, a lot of stuff. I was influenced by those. That was part of why I went to the Center for Applied Rationality, which started from that. And I have volunteered there a bunch of times, like 15 times as a mentor, I believe. And that's been one thing that I've been trying to bring back to Vancouver, with limited success for a while. Part of what I've been trying to bring back is also the sense of community that has been in the Bay Area, where CFAR is based.
Hmm. Okay, so you're in Vancouver, BC, right?
That's right.
Okay. Um, I lived for I was or well oh you got to catch me.
Careful, careful.
It's automatic. So it's the lizard brain.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah. So there was the birth. The birth happened in Portland, Oregon, and then moved at a young age to Vancouver, Washington, um, across the river.
Right. So
So
that's
just
why
wanted to
there's the
clarify.
differentiation between the Vancouvers.
Yeah. Yes. Very different in size, but just curious. Um,
Whenever I've been to Portland, I've always had this problem.
I'm from Vancouver. That was quoting you, by the way. That was not. I was not speaking, or
Mm-hmm.
there was not speaking in first person. All right. So speaking of AI, let's do something a little fun. Um,
Okay.
so in preparation for this talk, not knowing anything about you and not knowing how it was going to go, I there was a conversation with GPT-3, basically presenting this question. So the prompt that was given was: a man is a guest on a podcast, but the podcast host wants the guest to interview him. The guest knows nothing about the host, so he starts asking a list of interesting icebreaker questions. And the first question was, "What is your first?
Ah, very clever.
What is what is your first memory?" And then so that was the first question, and then everything else was supplied by GPT-3. And there was a list of about 26 really interesting questions. So if you don't mind, we will change the context a little bit and bring in a third host or third guest to this podcast, which will be GPT-3.
Excellent
So
framing. I like
all
it.
right. So let's start with the question of the prompt, though, which is very interesting. What is your first memory?
Probably being in daycare when I was like 2, and I just have very vague memories of where it was and who my caretaker was at the time, Nazrin. Um, I remember liking avocados.
Any emotional flavor?
Um, it was nice. It was safe. It was pretty good.
Cool. All right.
It's yeah.
On to the next one. So this is great. So GPT-3, not knowing as much about you as we now do, but it asks, what was your first job? what,
Right.
what,
So maybe like, what is the first thing I ever got paid for?
there you go. Yeah. What was the first thing you got paid for?
I'm pretty sure it was fixing someone's computer.
No
I
kidding.
had to some extent, I had a small reputation for fixing people's computers. So, you know, the neighborhood would talk about like, hey, you need someone to fix your computer, like neighborhood of older people, this guy, and then they would ask me.
And what was your age at that time?
I think I was like 16.
Whoa. Okay. So still
Would
a
have been
teenager.
16, 2008. No, I would have been 18. It's like
Okay.
not as connected to other things in my memory, which is interesting.
Yeah. Well, it shows that money is not obviously one of your main focuses in life. Would you say
Hmm.
that's true?
That's very true. I'm much more interested in meaning and experiences. Like I took the somewhere it said when people spend on their experiences, they like are much more fulfilled than when they spend money on things. And I sort of took that way too seriously, and here I am.
Fascinating. All right. So here's a good one. What is the strangest thing that has ever happened to you?
Oh, oof, oof. There's a few candidates. Uh the strangest thing I'll have to think of.
Yeah, we can make it a little
Uh
easier. Just strange, something strange or weird or kind of maybe paranormal.
I have some spicy answers that I notice I don't want to answer with, and then I'm having trouble thinking of anything else,
Oh no!
even though I know that there are other.
Why don't you want to share the spicy answers? Or are they? I mean, you don't have to share. I'm curious.
Yeah, yeah,
What's
yeah.
the feeling? What's the feeling
There's
behind it?
right. For good question. What is the feeling? What is the feeling? I don't know. Part of it is like it is a podcast. It is being said to whoever.
Right.
Um,
Okay. They are
yeah, I
watching.
think part of it is also like how I say it is important. The phrasing is important because you know, it could mean wildly different things depending on how I say it.
Fascinating.
Yeah, just give me a second.
Yeah. Take your time.
So I guess the spicy answer is um, dating someone who turned out to be a lesbian not once but twice.
Two different people.
Two different people for like in
Yeah.
a
That.
long-term relationship.
Whoa. Okay. Okay. That's very. I can see why you took some time there to phrase it
There's
correctly.
many other things to be said about that, but that is the yeah.
That's very, yeah. There's probably not many people that could say that. do you want to talk any more about how you feel about that, or what's? It seems like
It's
there's a
been
lot to unpack.
there is indeed a lot to unpack there. I mean, part of me is like, am I really doing this? At some point, I will write a memoir about the whole thing. Um, Apparently, I have a type is like one thing that I'm learning.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I've also been pretty. Uh, this is part of my influence thing as well, as like, I've been pretty influential in encouraging them to explore their sexuality, um, and then they figured that out. But my type seems to be like lesbian who doesn't know that they're a lesbian. Maybe I don't know what part of the social web is figuring that out, but
Right.
apparently it
Right.
is, and that's happening in the background.
Okay.
So as far as
Yeah.
identity goes, I guess that's something you could be like, I guess this is an identity.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just something. I mean, yeah. There sounds like some sort of, yeah. Like, what does it even mean to have a type? I mean, that's a very interesting question in itself. Like, what is that?
Oh,
There's I
jeez.
mean,
Oh,
it's
jeez.
but what you're talking about, it's like a deeply like unconscious kind of uh, feelings, right? I mean, it's not like a conscious thing in your mind, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm going to go on a rant about types.
Oh yeah, please do.
Do-
No.
People think they have a type. They're probably not totally wrong about it, but definitely like who you think you are attracted to uh, is some part of an identity that you're constructing for sure. Like there's a reason identity politics has become a whole thing.
Okay.
Um, but like I think it applies in every single sub case. Do you like basically what are your preferences? And what is your idea of your preferences, and how prepared are you to be like wrong about your preferences if you have an opportunity to experience something that is not in line with your preconceived notion of what your preferences are? This is what we call unknown unknowns
That's
in
right. Unknown
the
unknowns.
business of context artistry. And yeah, basically,
Wow.
I'm simultaneously holding this stance of like, well, apparently, I have certain preferences and types, and also I like can be wildly wrong about what many of them are. I'm going to choose, some to explore or be open to. But that's been a question that's been big in my mind when I've, trying to get back into dating and everything, and then like there's all this evaluation happening on apps that I have to be doing, and how can you do something with so little information and low bandwidth things such as pictures?
That's a great point. One thing that you brought up that's very curious or interesting is just the idea that there's the type that someone can say they have, and then there's the real type that they're actually attracted to, perhaps. And what you're saying is that often those are not in line with each other. Um,
I mean, I've experienced other people realizing this
yeah.
very distinctly. I've also experienced myself realizing this. I at some point was like, I don't have a type in particular. Like it depends on so many things, you know. Like the person themselves has to like uh, resonate and like fit in a good way. And this is not a like that is my type is like something about how coherent is the person or something, not necessarily like any particular bit. You could say is one idea of what my type might be.
Hmm. Wow. And
My
this brings up
preconceived notion of it.
right, and this brings up the whole idea of like just how little we actually know ourselves. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like that's there's been that kind of desire in different experiments I've done, especially social experiments, or that have been done, is just that curiosity to see what arises in a situation that is completely novel and unique. And before taking that step, one challenge was asking strangers to give compliments. So walking around like a Costco and just
Mm.
going up to someone and saying, "Hey, can you give me a compliment?" And that was one of the most terrifying things ever. There was like half an hour beforehand of just like sweating and fear and like imagining being thrown out by the security or slapped in the face, all this stuff. And but and also the response, like the inner response, what would happen. And but what is revealed in those
Hmm.
situations, if you actually go and do that thing that you've never done, it is like you're saying, it's often a surprise. It's like all no matter how all the mental predictions and things you can come up with of how it's going to be like and how it's going to go are all false. I mean, it sounds like you've experienced this. Like, can you share some other examples of times where like what you thought was going to happen was so different than what actually happened?
I mean, so basically, you're asking, like, when was I surprised? I
By
think is
yourself,
a
by
really good way.
yourself. Yeah, and by yourself
Ah,
and others, but mainly by yourself and your response.
well, so I think the first thing that comes to mind is the summer camp at which I became conscious. This was PSYL 2009. Beforehand, um, so it interacts with other people, of course. Beforehand, I was kind of snarky. I was like just kind of trying to put everyone else down, or being like, other people they're like not worth my time. They're all dumb,
Okay.
basically. And I care about the world and stuff. Look how superior I am. Blah blah. Uh, and then I go to this summer camp where everyone seems to have some interest in what's going on in the world. Everyone is pretty friendly. Everyone is, I mean, like, not exactly everyone, but like far more uh, people there out of the there was a filter for people who are much more interesting and interested in what's happening in the world, making the world a better place, and also being friendly and some kind of fit stuff. And
Okay.
it turned into a community. My first experience of actually having a community of some kind. This camp was 3 weeks long only, and it managed to do that. I was surprised that like I could like other people pretty much, was one thing, and that like I actually enjoyed hugs. I thought hugs were like, I don't know, weak or something, or
Mm,
to like want a hug was weak.
curious.
But like
Yes.
then I just like actually enjoyed the hugs, and I was like, oh, this is just good actually.
Yep. But here's
Um,
the question: like, how many
mhm.
times like that strong conclusion you had about hugs being weak or whatever it was, it probably wasn't backed up by that much data, right? Like how like had you been hugged a lot
It was
before?
backed up by a lot of negative data,
What do you mean? What do you mean negative?
like hugs not happening, people not talking much about it,
Exactly. Right.
seeing other
Right.
people hug a few times.
Right.
Kind
But
of
it not
irrelevant data in another sense.
right. 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 So it's like it's crazy how these super strong conclusions can be drawn from really no like without any basis.
Hmm.
Right. I mean, so it's like I
I
mean,
mean,
so it's
some people
not
call that trauma.
right. Yes. I mean, it is yes. That definitely I can see that. And as you're describing your conclusions, and there's definitely a lot of relatability there, in terms of I mean the word that comes to mind is fear. It really is fear. Um, so in those 3 weeks, you described it as becoming conscious. Now that's a curious choice of words, though. Like what I mean, what why would you call yourself more conscious after that?
Um, it's my word, my way of explaining the size of the difference that it made and the impact that it's had on the rest of my life, I would say.
Okay,
Like I didn't feel like I had agency before that. I wasn't doing anything in particular. I was just like snarking at the world.
oh, that's so good. That's so good. And that combination of like that snarkiness and cynicism with non-doing and not and lack of agency. That
Hmm.
seems to go
Hmm.
hand in hand very often. Why do you think that is?
I mean, there's a lot of levels of rationalization that can be happening. If the world is a bad, hopeless place, uh, then, like, of course, you can't do anything about it. It just feels like the other side of the narrative. Of course, they go hand in hand.
Yep,
But
yep.
if you can do something in the world, then maybe you can do something good that you want, or maybe if there's something possible that's good in the world, well, maybe you can do it. It's these are different attractors, different self-reinforcing loops.
Fascinating. And that's like, so going back to like the experiment with like asking strangers for compliments, and that was in like this whole like 30-day challenge, like a discomfort challenge,
Mm-hmm.
inspired by people online that have done similar things. um, that was like over and over again, the lesson was basically hammered in, that yeah, it's just that difference between, because like one of the biggest excuses in terms of like sitting there like being like, okay, like, because like it's like the context thing, like just sitting there on the stage should be really easy, right? And I mean, it's physically it's completely easy, right? But it's like, but so like asking, like talking to a stranger, or I mean that's probably harder, but the whole point was to choose things that were like, there was no reason, like no rational reason why someone couldn't do them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I can talk, I can walk up to a person, I mean there, so
No, like,
so
causal reason.
right, right. So as opposed to like great dreams or visions that someone might have, and be like, well, if only I could do that or whatever, like no, these were like super concrete, easy tasks. And then seeing the mind like go into overdrive, saying, oh no, this is what's going to happen, the security guard is going to show up, they're not going to like this is good, this, they're going to look at you weird, this is good, I mean, like real like
Mm-hmm.
vivid 3D movies being played in the mind, like saying this is what's going to happen. And the whole underlying thing was, since we know what's going to happen, why even do it?
Yep.
Like that was the underlying thing. Like, and like part of the self was like, well, yeah, I mean, well, obviously I know what's going to happen, yeah.
I
But it's
mean, you
like,
basically described depression.
oh, really? Is that okay? Because that, yeah,
My
I've had,
understanding of depression.
okay, expand on that.
Like,
That's yeah.
yeah, my sense of depression. I say that like a more general form of things, not just in this particular situation, all this like bad stuff is going to happen, but like a sort of uh, every the person's body mind system has gotten to a point where like they can't really make traction on anything. Everything seems like it's a, a security guard is going to come for them if they try and do
Right.
this. And, like, it's not going to work. Um, so it's like they just have low confidence in anything that they do, like can build or do something, that they can do something. Um, and they're usually wrong about at least some of it. Um,
Well,
like, I
well,
would say most of them are wrong about some of it.
but that was another thing too, and this is so like going back to like your thing of like being snarky or kind of cynical. It really is like, it's the only way to be right. It's the only way to be right in life. It's basically to adopt a super cynical perspective, because you will be proven correct. Like if you believe people are out to get you, and people, like you will be proven correct. Like over like
Yep.
that attitude is self-fulfilling. And so like once again,
Yep.
like in like, so even like that deep need in us to be right, like even if we're miserable, like what are your thoughts on that? Like why is it so important to be right about stuff as opposed to like being happy?
There's something about calibration and like confidence. I said earlier, confidence. I guess one way I think about how humans work is we kind of have a model of the world and what's going to happen, and a lot
Yep.
of it is emotionally uh, built. It's not like here's my detailed 3 million paragraph whatever on how the world works. And it is in some sense much more important to like have an idea of just what's gonna happen, how to like start even beginning to make sense of the world, than it is to be happy, because that is the underlying way to actually be able to do anything in the world. Like insofar as our mind is useful at all, is for predicting the future and trying to do things. Um, and yeah, whether we're happy or not is kind of a byproduct, at least from like an evolutionary standpoint.
Agreed. Yes.
So, like biologically, you can make the argument that that's what's going on there.
Right. Right.
I really like your point about the self-reinforcing stuff too. I mean, and that ties right back into the intelligent social web. You know, where does your identity come from? Because there's not just the other people around you reinforcing this identity, but there's also like, you know, how you present yourself can cause them to reinforce it, or you can reinforce it for yourself, or like there's just all these loops everywhere. And this is, you know, what depression will look like. It's like, in fact, that reinforcement has gotten so strong that they can't, like, they don't have a move available that they can see at the time to get out of it, out of this self-reinforcing hell. So I've had this perspective for like 8 years now of like, wait, everything is like self-reinforcing loops, and that is the main thing causing things to be the way they are currently.
Fascinating. Wait. Okay. Okay. So you're saying self-reinforcing loops causing things to be the way they are. That almost sounds like you're saying your mind is creating the world. Is that what you're getting at? Or are you, like
Not
talk
quite
about that?
that.
Okay.
Like separate from me existing.
Okay.
Um, many things are, the other way of saying this is that many things are in an equilibrium of some kind between many different forces, and like, you know, many forces are trying to keep things in a certain place, and many forces are, you know, trying to be chaotic, introduce noise, and bump where the equilibrium is to a different equilibrium. You know, and you can see this in economics and politics all over the place, but you can also see it in this intelligent social web in social networks. You know, who's high status? Well,
Mm.
according to who? Well, probably a certain social group. Like, there's definitely places I go and I feel like I'm high status, then I go somewhere else and people are like, who are you? You know?
Right.
And like, once you have high status, you get to say, you know, who else is high status, and blah, 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 blah. Until, like, you know, like I fuck up somehow. And then,
And then
oh
yeah,
no,
then you're dead. You're dead.
and I get
What
canceled.
exactly? What one?
Canceling is like this new interesting technology of bumping people out of their positions.
That's a great way to put it. A social technology. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Talk a little more about that. That is because I mean, status is definitely something that is very, very key and important, but very taboo. So it's not talked about very much. Because one of the points is
Certainly not okay. So like direct status things usually aren't talked about um, in a social context. I've definitely
right,
been
but
in groups where people talk about status a lot in a more abstract sense, like we're doing right now.
exactly, yes, yeah, yeah. Who's more high status, the host or the guest that is being the host? Yeah, but it's very curious what the yeah. So in terms of status, so status being a relative value, like
Mm-hmm.
what are your thoughts more on that? Because that is because like someone that's high, like you said, like you could be in one situation and be high status, then you could go to another group and you're a no name whatever, um, and that also kind of, I mean, it's like the more important status is to someone, like the harder it, like the more they'll want to be in that one group where they have some status. I mean, it's just a very
Mm-hmm.
curious phenomenon of and it's like once again, as mentioned, this is something that's thought about a lot. Status is like, it seems like the highest status people are the ones that don't need it. Does that make sense? Like they're the ones that are
They've
basic.
gotten to a position where they no longer need it, I would say.
Well, okay, but I mean, I'm talking about like internally,
Oh, okay.
because like internally there is this desire to like to be to have high status, but I don't know. There's some like economic study where they asked people like, would you rather have $1 million, or yeah, what was it like? Would you rather be like a millionaire or have like $100,000 more than all your friends and family in terms of income?
Mm-hmm.
And like almost everyone chose like to be a little bit more above their friends and family. Um, I don't know if that was like the two choices, but it was the idea that people want relative status
Yeah.
to like to the group that's important to them. Um, but it seems like the people that get to the top of the game are the ones that really are like, it's like they're playing their own game almost. Like I don't know. I'm just curious. Like what how do you people play that status game? Why do they play the status game? And what makes someone high status?
I mean, this is like the
10
whole
seconds. 10
hierarchy.
seconds.
10 seconds. God. I mean, that's the whole game. It's about resource distribution. It determines everything else in some sense. There's
Okay.
many different strategies. I mean, if you ever play strategy games, you know that there's a meta game as well, and the meta game is always changing.
Okay.
So this is like you have to play based on how you think other people are playing. So a common dominant strategy is to not care about status or not need it, whatever that means. But there's
Right.
definitely people out there who care a lot about it. They won't show it, but they definitely care a lot about it, and they strategize in the scheme, and they succeed. Most people don't succeed at that as well as others, but someone's got to succeed, and some
Right.
of those
Okay.
people happen to be people who try.
Right. So, but I guess that's my question. So, like the people that care a lot about status and focus on gaining it, I guess, or the question is, are those people craving status for itself, or because they realize they can use it to accomplish other goals, or like gain the resources? Because it seems like most people you meet in general, they want the status for status sake. Like they just want to feel high status.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you see the difference there between like wanting
Yeah.
wanting to feel high status, like, oh, I got a trophy, woohoo, but what can you do with it? Nothing. Or as opposed to like
You can put it in your trophy case and show it to your friends.
well, there you go. Right. Okay. So I mean, so that's obviously
I have a bunch of trophies right here, so I'm like well aware of the trophy thing.
We're hitting a nerve. But yeah, so that's
Well,
very
no, but
interesting.
I've actually asked this question. Okay, I have these trophies. Like, now what? What do I do with these trophies? What do they prove? Like, anyone who's seen me dance knows I can dance. Like, the trophies don't really. I don't know. They They mean something to people who just have no idea, who have not seen me dance, have no idea about dance, and they like meet me and they come to my house. They like. That's the only person that they can possibly confer status to, and even then, it probably sits into the category of like. I don't know. I feel like everyone's got trophies. Maybe that's just. I'm saying everyone's got trophies because that tells everyone, what my social status is. Because all my friends also are the type of people who also all got trophies. Everyone's got trophies. Whatever.
High
I can't
performers.
relatively gain anything, but relative to other people who have different friends, maybe I'm winning. I don't know.
Interesting. But okay, so yeah. I mean, there's the social acclaim. But I guess the thing that, or the thing we're trying to get at is what, in terms of status, like it seems like in order to win at that game, like you talked about like the meta game that you have to play, but it's like the fear of being canceled, the fear of like of people, like what do people think about us? It seems like in order to overcome that fear, there has to be almost a callousness toward towards needing that approval or that status. Does that make sense? Like it's like this weird paradox where it's like,
Callousness?
well, like I mean, so say like I'm in a group, or I'm playing some game, and I see someone a little bit ahead of me, okay, who's doing well, and I look up to them, and I'm like, I want to be like them. I want to be I want their approval, and they say, oh, good job, and it feels good. It's like, oh yeah, woo, I'm part of the group. But then as that skill improves, and you start like going past that person, or start going like leaving the group because your skills are getting so much better than the group, then suddenly the group is can like turn on you in a weird way. And I think this is what canceling happens a lot. Like canceling, in a certain sense, really is like this envy or like this pulling down of like this former idol.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I'm just wondering from so why don't you talk about your experience with dance? Like so it sounds like you what kind of dance, number one, but also like how is
So
that?
you've asked a number of questions now that I don't know that I've gotten the chance to answer.
Oh, okay, yeah, just stop. Yeah,
Actually,
stop it. Yeah, go back to whichever one you remember last.
the one I remember the most is like, are people who are uh, doing well at status, or like, why do people want status? It's the one
Yeah,
that I
there you go.
remember
Yeah, yeah.
best.
Okay.
Um, Part of that is just how self-aware are they about like what status can get. I mean, people talk about it in terms
Mm,
of social capital.
okay.
Uh, if I can, if I don't have a lot of money, but I got a bunch of friends in the Bay Area who, if I asked like, hey, can I, stay on your couch? Uh, that's a form of social capital where like I don't need money because I got this other kind of thing. People, they like me enough that they are at least willing to put up with me, or I in fact enjoy talking to me, hopefully, or having me around. Like I think it's sort of indisputable that status does get you things.
Okay.
I mean, one of those things that might get you is envy. And then
Right.
there's just a
Right.
question of how self-aware are people of their social strategies in that space. Like so you can just go for a money strategy and use money to get everything you want, and you might find that you can't actually get everything you might want, but you might get everything that you think you want, which goes back into what are your preferences, what are your type that we talked about
There
earlier.
you go. There you go. Right. Right. So yeah. So status. So you're saying status is one game or one way to get what you want. Um, Money is another one. It seems like a third option, and this is maybe where like the like enlightenment comes in, or basically the people that say that they just stop playing like altogether, like they just give up any kind of possessions or any kind of like claim to anything.
Yeah. So this is the classic like XKCD thing of like, well, so you've found the people who are playing all these games and stuff. You see the people who are like deciding to give up on the game, and now that you've identified both of them, you can feel superior to both of them, and that's what really counts. Now you're really winning the game.
So true. It's all yes, yeah. There's every time
It's a
you
very good
break it.
strategy.
Is that sarcastic, or do you actually you think it is?
Well, it's a mix of like sincere and ironic. I like it totally depends on like, do people buy into your strategy then of feeling superior to both because you've been able to frame the whole situation in terms of just like, they're playing the I'm not playing the game. Good for them, and that's like this is a whole frame control thing. And I don't know if you know anything about the non-naive trust dance, but that has a lot to say about frame control.
Oh, tell
Um,
yeah. Please expand. Non-naive trust
I'll
dance.
talk more about frame stuff,
Okay.
non-naive trust dance.
All right, go for
I'm
it.
interested in frame stuff though. Yeah, like it's sort of the thing I said about being superior to both is that is am I being sincere or ironic or like sarcastic? That's I mean there's two people there's two audiences. There's you who I'm talking to, and there's sort of an audience, and I have to imagine an audience as well. How are
Right.
they going to receive the thing if it's ambiguous as well? In particular, am I
Yep.
doing an additional like I've already thought of how they might respond to me saying that I'm superior, sort of thing. I have implicitly this all like it all just runs.
Right. Right.
Um, and I mean, there's sort of the story I can tell about how sincere or ironic I am. And it's also up to them to sort of believe or construct their understanding of me such that, I don't know, they come to whatever conclusion they do about how I'm saying based on their experiences of people talking about status and whatnot. It's a different kind of dance than, the physical dance, but it's a meaning dance of some kind, this frame control thing.
frame control. Yep. Yeah, and that's
So
okay.
part of my game is to be somewhat illegible and not give you a complete answer, and just be like, well, here's all the like factors, and you figure it out. And I like that game. That's a good game.
A mystery, a little bit of mystery. So
Context artistry a little bit.
right, right. Well, context frame. I mean, similar, right? Like you're changing the frame, like so
Very
so
similar.
uh, controlling the frame. So that's kind of the idea that of like the people that like win the status game, or like the leaders, you could say. Or let's take Steve Jobs. Okay, like what did they call or what was the
Cool.
famous phrase about Steve Jobs? Reality distortion field. People that worked with
Mm-hmm.
him said that he had a reality distortion field, where basically they would go into a meeting with him, thinking this idea was impossible, and then an hour later they come out being like, "Yeah, it's good. We're gonna do it. It's amazing." So like someone like him seems like a good example of someone that's very good at creating a frame, or basically controlling the frame.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it's or another way is that is thought of is like a game, like the game someone's playing. So like you pointed out, like all status happens in a context. There's no such thing as objective status. It all is happening in some game that a group of people are playing, whether it's an actual game like a
Mm-hmm.
board game where there's like very clear status, or whether it's a society like like United States or all the whatever. But it's like there's always a game, and it seems like the people that are playing the game and actually want to win the game are not the same people who are creating the game. It's like the people that create the game for the players. Like it's like you have to like be outside the game somehow. I don't know. I don't know if that
Yeah, yeah.
makes
There's
sense.
Well, I have something to say. Whether what you're saying
Okay.
makes sense might be beside the point,
All
but
right.
you've
Yeah.
inspired
No.
me to say something.
It probably
That's the
didn't.
game we're playing now.
That's right. Free association. Go.
Part of a game here is can I make my interviewer look good?
Yeah.
Make it seem like he knows what he's saying, or he's saying a useful thing.
Sure.
Playing a game, yeah. So board games are like an example of a pretty closed system. There's like a fixed sort of meaning. You get the most victory points, you win. Great, right? But then there's also like the people playing the game, and they have to sort of buy into this system of meaning that the game has ascribed. Is in fact the person who gets the most victory points the highest status person? I mean, maybe someone decides to like troll the whole game, or play the game like they normally win, so they like do something else, and that's like even more high status.
That's so
Um,
true. That's
and
so true.
this is even more weird in video games, I think, where you get a game like Minecraft. How do you get high status in Minecraft? Like you can have a cool castle, or build a computer out of Minecraft blocks or whatever. That's pretty cool. But like, who knows you've done that? Who's on your server? What kind of mods do you play? Minecraft's a good example of like make your own meaning, make your own game within
Right.
a game that has some rules, but it doesn't have like as much of a fixed set of who's high status. And like it gets even weirder with something like dance, where you've got winners, you've got competitions, right?
Right.
So like
Right.
obviously whoever wins is like high status, which is one game you could play. But you can also play the game of like did I achieve my own goals in dance? Did I do the best I could? Did I have fun dancing? Did I have fun performing? Did I not compete and instead social dance all night with all my favorite dancers? There's many games to play.
Right. Right. So yeah, and that's where it seems like the people that are most like fulfilled or happy are the ones that are like you were saying, that are actually aware of the strategies they're using, of the goals they have, and aren't just blindly like following the rules and trying to win this game, where it's like they're like more in touch with the games that actually matter to them.
I think people who don't have to think too much about that and succeed also are pretty happy. That's just like if they
Good
have a
point. Good
natural
right.
fit between
Right. Right.
their skills and what their environment is demanding of them. to be high status, and they just do it, and then things are good
So
until
probably
they're
why
not.
so much? Yeah, right, right. And then they're confused, like what the hell happened? I was the
Right. Then
winner.
then then like
Everyone
that's
loved
almost a
me. Everyone
bad
loved me.
position to be in.
It's fragile. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, and this is probably where like a lot of thought about status has come from. Is just a personal, just being bad at the social game, or growing up not being a natural at it, and trying to figure out like what the point is, or what I mean. People that are naturally good at it,
Yeah.
like you said, that you don't even have to be self conscious. You can just like someone that's really
I mean, there's
charismatic.
probably both. There's probably people who like do think about it, in fact, but are also good at it. Um, I just imagine that there is, and I don't know this, I haven't quizzed, a lot of high status people about how they think about status. That might be an interesting game to play, figure out how to do that. Um, my sense is like, there's different levels of awareness. No, it's not just like they're aware or not. It's kind of just how much are they thinking about what they're trying to get.
Right. Interesting. Cool. Okay, let's do a couple more questions from GPT-3 here.
Okay.
So to change it up a little bit. All right. All right. What is the best advice that you have ever been given?
Someone once read me the poem "If" by Kipling, I think, um, and it wasn't exactly advice, but it was, I don't know, frame of mind to take into the world of, you can be your own person, but also you can listen to other people,
Mm,
and like these are compatible.
fascinating. Fascinating. I
There's a lot
so
of things out there about like, you have to be your own person and ignore all the haters and what everyone else has to say, and uh, I guess that's sort of in reaction to a society that's like, here are the standards by which you should be a human. And uh, I mean, in fact, I think both have to happen somehow,
hmm.
are happening.
Yeah. Well, that's much more hopeful than yeah, just that complete like ruthless, and that's like going back to the idea of like status, like just like ruthless, like almost psychopathic kind of disregard for other people's feelings and climbing to the top. Um, and
Hmm.
you're saying that it's possible to do both.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool. Um, so in kind of a same vein, then. Um, oh, actually, no. Here, let's just go off the deep end. Have you ever had a
Great.
near-death experience?
Uh, I mean, I've had experiences that at the time I thought might be near death. Uh,
Well, I think
have
that
I come
counts.
face to face with what might be death? Is kind of the question. Like, I think if you've ever been in a car crash, this is
Mm,
one example of that. We are just like, well, I might. Oh, okay, I didn't die, but like, well, geez, I really. So yeah, I've been in a car crash. I was the driver. It was my fault even.
whoa. Oh
Um,
man.
which is, it has a whole extra layer of meaning. It was a fairly low speed crash though. Um, so I didn't have any permanent injuries of any kind.
But what about your passengers?
But ever since then, it's like, oh yeah, these are death machines we're rolling around here. They're a few thousand pounds just casually going pretty like faster than you can run. We're not kidding around here.
Yeah.
And I've just sort of have that in my awareness whenever I'm driving
Were there
around cars.
any existential kind of things that came from that, or like
Oh
any?
yeah, I was like, am I a bad driver? There was definitely an identity thing going on here because I was like, I am like great at driving. I had previously played a bunch of racing games as well, and like
Okay.
realistic simulation racing games, and I like took those skills into being a driver. Not like drifting and like seeing how fast I can go, but just like can I just do this like normal turn, like really smooth though, stuff like that. Can I get this optimal acceleration curve out of the corner? Even though
So
I'm just like
so
driving, a car in the city.
right. So there was one of those surprise, personal surprise moments in a negative sense, as opposed to like your experience at summer camp. Um, that basically revealed this aspect of you that wasn't necessarily accurate, um, or at least you weren't as good a driver as you thought you were.
I I I mean, good driver. I think you have to deconstruct as well. Like what makes a good driver? There's a lot of people who can't do smooth turns
That
out of a corner.
good point, right?
In this particular case, it was like it highlighted a thing that I was lacking of like when there's a stale red light, it's hard for me to notice them because normally how when I see a red light, it's like um, it's because it just changed from green or it goes yellow red and then I'm like, oh, okay, stop. Or there's cars in front of me that are already stopped, and just this was the case of there were no cars around, um and there was a stale red light that I didn't like see was already red, and I was just already like traveling a bunch. And so now I'm like, stale red lights, that's a thing I got to pay attention to.
Fascinating, and that goes into the whole thing too of like, I mean, good and bad, and how easy it is to like be so binary like that, whereas it's just like, is that even important, like you said, like what does it
It's
mean to be a
just
good
a
driver? What does it
compression,
mean?
I would say.
Right, it's a compression into like this. I mean, but we do it like every area of life. It's just
Hmm.
instinctual. Whereas like, yeah, the nuance of saying like, yeah, I make smooth turns, or I can make smoother turns than like anyone else in the city. Like that doesn't have the same like gut feel to it as being like, I am a good driver, or I am a great driver.
I think I've in fact disidentified a lot with good and bad though. Like I've basically, when someone says good or bad, I deconstruct in my head. Like, okay, probably they mean this thing, and like if I don't know what they mean, I might ask
Smart.
what they mean by good and bad in this case. It's been a habit over the last, I don't know, 5 years or something, of like good and bad are just fake and don't mean anything basically.
Oh yeah, that is,
So
so
I
good.
basically don't identify with
So
I'm a
good.
good or bad anything in particular.
Hmm. Well, that's going back to identity now. Yeah.
Hmm.
So would you say like you do have a lot of control, or do people in general have control over their identity, or should they just let it come from outside?
I mean, they're one part of the identity creation engine. This is like, a nature nurture sort of question, in that it's like,
Right.
well, I mean, they just both have their role. They both do something. If you don't present as having an identity of some people, people will just be like, oh, it's the shy guy or whatever. Like they'll still make up their own thing, or they might not make up a thing at all. And then you're just the person no one talks to.
And that, oh, there you go. That's going back to frame control,
Uh-huh.
right? Right. I mean, you basically say like, if you don't control your own frame, other people will do it for you. Is that a valid way of using that?
I mean, that's more or less true. I mean, the thing is people still have to like agree with your frame or not somehow. If you don't control your frame, that might be like a surrendering of your frame rather than a like giving up or not controlling it. And they're like, if you try and control it really hard, people might try and control it back, and so it becomes a red queen race, if you know that term.
That it's familiar, but please go into
I
it a
don't
little
remember what the
bit.
original example is, but it's something like an arms race where, uh, in a relative sense, no one gets anywhere, even if the objective amount of whatever has gone up. So, like, if the U.S. has 1,000 nukes and Russia has 1,000 nukes, and then Russia gets 500 more, like, and then the U.S. then has to get 500 more to be equal, and they're like just spending all these resources, not getting anywhere relatively. That's a red queen race.
Okay, so going back to like the control the frame thing, what would be an example of two people trying to control each other's frame? Like, can you think of one in your mind, or can you like come up with a scenario of what that would look like?
I mean, imagine we were arguing about what the frame of this podcast was or something, and I was like insisting that, um, I don't know, I'm interviewing you actually,
Okay.
or something, and you're like, that was not what I was told. I was told that I was going to be the guest would be interviewing the you, blah blah blah, right? And like you're like, I don't know, it's my podcast, like don't if it's my podcast, don't I get to say what happens on my podcast? Blah 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 blah. It's the increasing aggression and tightness that happens.
Right, but and specifically with the frame would be like, what does the podcast mean? Is that what you're saying? I mean, is that I mean, talk a little more about frame. Like, what is that? Is a podcast the frame? Like we're trying to define the
Well, I mean
frame.
that can even be the question is the podcast. I think the podcast, the fact that we're on a podcast, I'm calling it a podcast. Um, we're currently talking to screens via the internet, and
Yep.
modulated by microphones and all sorts of stuff. And maybe I never publish it, but we're doing it in high quality for some reason, and blah 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 blah. So that's that. All that it's a podcast. It's going to be a podcast. Um, that is that is setting the stage for however we relate to whatever we're doing. And then the frame is like the social part of that, where it's like, this is a podcast. A podcast has a guest and a regular person. Maybe this one in particular does right now. Maybe it's just recurring people. There's a lot of ways to construct it, man. So like whatever part of the situation we're leaning into, or like what our assumptions are about the situation, is kind of the frame, I would say.
Right. So for the most part, though, you would say we're adopting a frame that's been given to us. Like we're adopting the frame of a podcast, and we're not really controlling it.
Yeah, it's about what's legible to other people. I mean, a podcast would not
Right.
be legible to people 50 years ago, I think. I don't know how far back
Right.
podcast goes in particular. I think it comes from iPod. So like part of the reason to have this frame, to adopt it, is, I mean, you could reverse it in that, like, I'm choosing to call this a podcast because this is what people are familiar with. But like, I have chosen it. I haven't just been given it by people. I might like do a thing and then people call it a podcast, even if I never refer to it like that. But nevertheless, I'm like, putting it out on the internet somehow.
Ooh. Okay. Uh, let's jump into that. Naming. What are your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts on naming as a way of basically controlling the frame or controlling people's ideas of things? Have Because it seems like there's been noticing that naming is a habit of like of very influential people. So
Like
talk
what?
about. Um,
Give me an example.
well, I mean, so like Steve Jobs. I mean, naming a company,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
naming products. But I guess politically, there's you know, giving
iPhones have a whole frame
nicknames.
control around them thing where they have those advertisements, shot on iPhone, not on iPhone, just iPhone. I hate it. It drives me
I
nuts.
that's never, yeah, haven't even noticed that. Wow. Um, but so like the idea of the podcast. Like if you came up with something and you didn't call it a podcast, and other people called it a podcast, it's like they say you're trying to come up with something that wasn't a podcast. Like you would want to come up with some sort of name and say
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
is what it is, and then if people choose to follow your lead, which they might not, they might just think you're weird and keep calling it a podcast. Um, so I mean, yeah, have you noticed that in terms of like setting the frame, like the power of naming, or even like naming yourself, like pop, like rock stars naming themselves, like that is all like it seems like such a key technology, to use your term, it seems like a key social technology of like if you can name something, you have power over it.
If other people adopt your name
If they adopt it, exactly. And
that
if
you
they
have
don't,
given it,
it actually backfires. And
or
then
it
you're
just
just
doesn't do
weird.
anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, the one thing is like, what am I going to name this episode?
There.
You
Right.
know,
Right.
uh, like
Exactly.
that is in this situation. I'm the one with the power to do that. You know, if it's like, uh, Nat makes a fool of himself in front of Eric for an hour and a half. You know, that would be a whole thing.
That
I'm
would
not
be
going to
pretty.
name it
Yeah.
that.
It would be pretty
Just
accurate.
for clarity.
Go for it.
I mean, I'll probably name it something like something referring to your experiment,
Yep.
and then something around identity. I don't know yet.
Yeah. So I mean, can you think of other examples in your life where you've named something?
Um, I mean, the example coming to mind is the history of naming dance styles.
Okay.
Currently, I do West Coast swing. Some people are trying to get it called modern swing these days. It used to be called Western swing, and before that, it was swing or like a descendant of Lindy Hop or a bunch of other things, depending on how you trace the lineage.
Okay.
Currently, West Coast swing is the official state dance of California. Most people don't know this. I think it's an interesting
Wow.
fact.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and most of the other states have like square dance or some other, I don't know. There's a lobby for square dance. Did you know that?
I did not. That is hilarious.
Anyway, so this is definitely, the same thing happens in music trends. Who gets to name the thing? Although I think those have exploded in a certain way where people can kind of just do whatever they want in a certain way. Me trying to use context artist as something that I might have as a job or identity title thing, calling it a
Yep.
job is definitely a bit of a stretch. Is
Yep.
one example of something I've named. I mostly don't name things. I think I try and do something original and then see what people think and then maybe give it a name.
Yeah. So have you ever given anyone nicknames? Did you give your girlfriends nicknames?
Oh yeah. Um,
I mean, that's naming. That's naming. I mean, that's
they're
nicknaming.
often references or they already had one though.
Okay. Okay. So adopting. Yeah. So from the, like a this perspective, it's like, yeah, nicknaming is something that's not hasn't been done like at all, um, but has definitely been observed in other people who are more, much more kind of outgoing or charismatic, and it seems like they give
Mm-hmm.
nicknames left and right. And I mean, a classic example is Jesus. He was giving nicknames to all. I mean, he gave nicknames to himself. He called himself the Son of Man. He named Peter. He had his
This is
second
a
in
very
command.
unconventional usage of nickname, I'm noticing.
Why is it unconventional? Why do you think that's unconventional?
uh this is a great example of the thing somehow. Um like nickname as like the son of God is like that occurs to me more like a title or
Well,
a,
no,
a
he didn't. He
role
didn't.
or
He didn't. He
something.
never. He didn't call himself Son of God. That was given to him by other people. He called himself Son
Oh,
of
okay.
Man. He would say, the Son of
Son of
Man
Man.
has
Okay.
no place to lay his head, and blah blah. I mean, so that was a nickname he gave himself. It turns out it wasn't that sticky because he ended up becoming, Son of God, and or other terms like Christ and different things. But like definitely with his apostles, like Simon, he called the Rock, like an actual like if he was in English, he would have just he would have been called the Rock. Um, some of the other ones were like Sons of Thunder. A couple of the other apostles. Um, but it's just very fascinating. It just is a demonstration of that power of a leader to give a nickname. And for whatever reason, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
seem like people talk about it very much, because it's like he says, you are the Rock, and then everyone else says you are the Rock, and they all start calling him that. Like I don't know. Yeah, it's just so it's just it's something that's interesting. Um, and also it's been one of those things like wondering like, in terms of like different experiments, like if acting more like using like intentionally naming things more, intentionally like giving people nicknames as a way of like increasing confidence or increasing charisma. Like what do you think about that? Like is that something you'd be interested in trying?
Is this another one of these experiments?
What? Oh no, yeah,
Is this another
it's
one
just,
of these experiments, social experiments?
I've never heard of anyone doing it. It's just
I
it's
mean,
been on the
I
back
think
burner.
Twitter is sort of an exercise in something like nicknames. So whenever people change their handle to whatever, Chowch is
Exactly.
currently magnificent adult baby, I believe. It's like, wow,
Yeah,
what a
that
title,
was
right?
what timing for his tweet about
Uh huh.
the
Uh huh.
100K acid tweet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a very so yeah. Do you give yourself nicknames like that, or you do? You have a nickname on Twitter. What is your current nickname on
I
Twitter?
guess so. Oh, right. So my handle is Lord Chisholm, which is like fairly old at this point.
Okay.
Um, but I don't know,
Well,
seems to convey or is about one aspect of my personality where I seem to carry myself in a sort of regal manner in some sense.
that's a
Um,
high status nickname to give yourself. That's pretty good.
I didn't give it to myself. That's the thing. I did sign up with it. Um, but that was in part because uh, my girlfriend at the time signed me up on Instagram or something, and she gave me that. She was like, "Get into Instagram," and then she was also part of getting me onto Twitter. But I basically that was like, you got to have the same handle on both. It's just easier.
Right, right.
And so I like, okay, I guess I'm Lord Chisholm, and I've just been Lord Chisholm. So, but like people don't know the story behind my handle, which I don't know what to do about that. That's interesting. People will get to hear it now.
Okay. Yeah,
Part of it anyway.
if you're comfortable, yeah. I'm very curious, especially because since you didn't come up with it.
I mean, it's like I said. I sort of this is related to the when I would snark at people. I thought I was better than everyone in a certain way, um, and sort of did a whole looking down, acting high status sort of thing. And as some people acquiesced to it. My friends at the time, um, they either were like sure, or they followed along with the people who did be like, oh yes, Lord Chisholm, and it was held both ways. And they're like, oh look at Eric, he's acting so whatever. And other times he was also like, it's, I mean, I guess Lord Chisholm is living up to his name. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting artifact. I like carrying that over.
So it was both positive and negative. Is that what you're saying? Or both like ironically and
I mean, it could be
sincerely?
viewed either way. Yeah. I mean,
No,
is being
yeah.
rich a sign of like you're selfish, or like you've made it in life?
Wow, wow. Okay, that's very very deep. That's good. So then, what about the your current name on Twitter? What
Oh,
what?
Eric is learning to tweet.
Yeah, yeah. What's the story behind that?
This is similar to why I'm doing a podcast thing instead of tweeting more. I don't have a lot of things that I feel like tweeting into the void. I don't really know who I'm tweeting to. I am now tweeting in particular to Tashin, who was the first guest on my podcast because we talked about it. And so when I think of like who would enjoy a thing for me to tweet, it is him. It is also Malcolm now at this point, the background actor and coordinating some of this podcast. And learning to tweet is like just sort of leaning into if this thing seems tweetable, I'm gonna like err on the side of tweeting it. Like if I even have the thought like tweet this, it's like okay, tweeting it.
Nice,
And it's sort of
nice.
jumping on the trend of just like people are doing stuff number out of number. And I'm just like sure, I'll be I'll be a little vulnerable in some sense and being like, I don't friggin' know what I'm doing on this site, really. I don't think, in some sense, most of us don't, or we don't have a. On some level, we don't really know what we're doing. We're just,
Well,
making it up as we go along.
it's
Some
it's
people
like
have
what
more
you're
of a structure around it than others.
it's like what you're saying. It's like Minecraft.
Exactly.
It's a
Exactly.
game similar to Minecraft. Like it really is open ended of how you want to play it.
I
There's
mean, in
definitely
a
yeah.
similar way, it's like I don't know how to be on a podcast necessarily, so it's sort of easier to get interviewed on a podcast than it is to maybe interview people. I
Well,
guess as
and,
a
and
as a
that's so cool. It's so cool that you could, or just like the lightning talks that you gave. It's like you didn't want to give a lightning talk, so you basically changed the context, and did something that you were more comfortable doing.
well, I
Or
played with the context.
you played right. But that's so inspiring, really, because it's like it's just giving yourself permission to basically not just do what everyone else is doing, um,
Mm-hmm.
but find a way that it's enjoyable for you and different. Like that. That is so. Yeah, that's super super cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
I find it very uncomfortable to like do something that I perceive absolutely everyone else is doing, and it's like extremely legible.
Oh, that's so true. That's so true. Because then yeah, like it's like people can like know exactly where you're failing at every step, right? Like if it's super legible, like a
Yeah,
yeah, that is much more terrifying.
I mean,
So
it
I
would
get
be a whole game to play the like I am extremely legible in these ways sort of thing, or like actually, I
uh,
think the thing I'm attempting to do is like be legible in new and interesting ways that people don't know how to like construct a frame around yet.
there you go, there you
Something,
go.
something like that.
Because at least from personal experience, it's like, and it goes back to me to kind of that snarky kind of like cynical place where you were as a younger man, but it's um, like wanting to play the game, or not wanting to do what people are doing because exactly because it's like it's too legible, but the temptation then is to go off into like complete illegibility where
Which I've also done.
so that's what yeah it's interesting. So yeah, what's an example of that? Like can you talk about that, because that seems like the kind of the defense mechanism to
I mean, people ask me, what do you do for a living? And I'm just like, I've done a lot of things. I've never been paid. I haven't had a job. You just sort of just like give a non-answer.
right. Well, yeah,
Um,
yeah. So yeah,
or
that's
just be
that's
like, oh,
definitely
that's, I don't
illegible.
know. That's a big question. That's hard.
Huh.
What else have I done? I mean,
Like
yeah,
in terms
people sometimes ask me about my identity, and I give them an answer like that. I sort of wonder, what frame are they even asking from? Like,
good point. Good point. And so
into what?
often, yeah, so often
This is
that's
this is
yeah,
related to the tweeting thing as well. Is like, who am I tweeting to? Who's understanding this thing that I'm saying? Who's asking these questions? Who's reacting to it? This is why I like conversation. This is why we're here today. It's this interactive, reactive thing.
yep, yep, cool. Well, this is the voice is starting to get a little hoarse,
Mm.
but this has been very enjoyable.
This has been a very high energy talk. It's been
Yeah.
very good. We've got an appropriate amount of loopiness, I think.
uh,
Are
yeah,
you
this
are
is
you looped out a little bit?
yeah. Talk about playing different games. Like there's so many different games that are going on in here right now. There's the challenge game that is trying to be maintained. There's the game of being on a podcast. There's a game of meeting a new person. There's the game. I
Uh-huh.
mean, yeah. Oh, this has been quite challenging. So and but fun. It's been fun.
Do you have any I don't know, any last words? Any reflections on your experience in any of that?
I guess or so to people that are listening or just from this perspective, it's there's a much greater sense after these 2 hours that what you are doing is definitely worthy of interest, and
Mm.
definitely recommend to everyone, listening, to keep following your story here. Just the little that has been gleaned from your story, from your context artist stuff, from just the way your mind works. It's one of those things where it's like it's very hard to tell where you're going to go, but it's going to be very very interesting and probably entertaining. So it's exciting stuff.
That's a great review. I like that review. I'm going to post that
Yeah,
somewhere. I'm going to quote
do
you.
it. Do it. Yes. Yeah. So social proof.
Right. Social proof. I mean, that's part of what's going on here. Yeah, oh, this has been higher energy than my uh, po- other podcasts so far in an enjoyable way.
Okay. Okay.
Sometimes I get into the energy feedback loop I talked about earlier, where you're doing a red green waste sort of thing, and I haven't felt like it's been attacking each other in a way. It's felt very we're in it,
Yeah, it's definitely
and
been. Yeah, there's been some combativeness going on. Yeah, but yeah,
and yeah, it's good talk. I imagine we'll see each other more on Twitter and other shared spaces.
definitely. And yeah, yes. So how can it be phrased? But yeah, hopefully, yeah, the tweets you write, um, just know that there will be this person reading them as well. So as your
Yeah,
audience, it'll be very very fun to see your thoughts. So
cool.
alrighty,
And thank you.
thank you.